continue to play the game, right? Continue to do this thing that you have exhausted, and it's not particularly interesting anymore. Now I'm going to ask you to continue to do that thing that you've already done a million times, but instead this time I'm going to give you a t-shirt.
Distraction makers.
So there are these moments when playing a game that you just kind of feel like, for whatever reason, like you're not really enjoying it anymore. What we wanted to do is kind of help clarify and solidify, like, what are the different elements that games usually have to maintain in order to maintain interest?
So for us, I think we've landed upon the definition of a game being a meaningful decision with an uncertain outcome and measurable feedback. So we'll talk through each of these sort of pieces of what we think makes up a game, and then we'll use that to try to get to the bottom of why people are feeling like games these days are more boring. Let's start with meaningful decisions, and let's talk about why that is important for something to be considered a game.
If any game offers any opportunity of either picking this choice or that choice, and both choices having high enough probability to make it worthwhile, potentially. So rock, paper, scissors, I think is a good example of this. Every choice in rock, paper, scissors is either...
an equal chance to win.
It's an equal chance of winning, right?
If the game has meaningful decisions, it means that players will be able to talk about what are known as heuristics, which are basically rules of thumb that over time players develop to help them play the game better. Where in rock, paper, scissors, it is a bit arbitrary in terms of whether you're going to choose rock, paper, or scissors. It might be informed by what your opponent last did, but overall, each option has an equal chance to win. So there's kind of an argument there that there isn't a meaningful decision in rock, paper, scissors, right? Where if let's say you had a situation where you had a choice between three things, like a 60-40 chance to do something. So 60% of the time, that is the thing I would want to choose, but sometimes I might want to choose the 40%. And that's the meaningful decision part of this.
When are you deciding to subvert what someone might be expecting you to do and go against what that 60% is?
In games that have more known information, or almost entirely known information, like chess or a lot of fighting games, you end up into this, I forget who named it, donkey space.
I know.
Donkey space basically means that you are operating like suboptimally to try to trick your opponent into thinking that you don't know what you're supposed to be doing. And that's a game that has sort of like entirely known information, right? Where your opponent can see the move you made and know that it's the wrong move, but might not know why you did it. Next, let's talk about uncertainty and outcome. And this might be the biggest part of it.
I think it's the biggest one. Yeah. I think like the key element that games usually need to have in order to have this sort of uncertainty is some sort of usually partial information.
This is where we start to get into some of the weirder territory, I think, with modern games. There's two problems here. One is, let's say you're gonna have a foot race or something. You're gonna me and you are gonna race. We race across the field. You win. Okay, well, let's try it again. Maybe it was close. Okay, so then we race. We do it again. You win again. Okay, maybe we'll do it a third time, but probably not. And we'll basically go like, okay, well, you're faster than me. So now I don't see any reason to participate in that game anymore. I know the outcome, or at least with enough certainty, I know that you're going to beat me at a foot race. And the only way that's going to change is if I train and get faster, or you're slower for some reason. So when we move that into modern game design, and we talk about particular games that have sort of a certainty in outcome, you can look at games where they've removed the fear of losing, or the fear of like nothing. There's no consequence to making a bad decision. And so the certainty and outcome there is that, oh, well, now I know that no matter what decision I make, I'm certain to not be, there's no consequences. I still will move forward in the story or whatever it is. The uncertainty of outcome has been removed. And if we look back, I'm gonna go on a little rant for a minute. If we go back to things like Resident Evil, let's say, right, where that game creates a sense of suspense because you know when the last time you saved was. And saving is tied to finding items in the game. Where you had to find typewriter ribbons in order to save your game file. And you can only save in a safe room. So you're at the safe room and you venture out away from it, finding a thing. And if you die, you're going to lose all that progress that you made unless you get back to the safe room and save again.
Very similar to finding like Sites of Grace in Elden Ring, or campfires in Dark Souls.
Bonfires, yeah.
Like you don't know. It goes away once you've played the game once, but generally if you don't know, then you're not sure, like, okay, how much further is this thing? Do I go back? Do I keep going?
The final thing here is meaningful feedback. So this is another area where modern games have made some sort of decisions that are leading to, I think, maybe some unintended consequences in terms of meaningful feedback being, I am getting better at doing this thing. I am learning versus I am being rewarded.
So battle passes.
Sure.
Right. Dailies, etc. So a lot of the times when it comes to these like dailies or battle passes, especially if it's offering like a specific act that the player has to do. If it's like you need to get a kill using this particular gun or something like that. Suddenly in the game that might have a lot of variance or randomness or whatever that a player has to sort of respond or react to, and that's a big part of the gameplay. Now you're actually taking the initial sort of short-term game and goals of that game and applying it to these new midterm goals. So now the thing that was working really well for the game and what was making the play experience enjoyable is now butting heads against what the player's actual goals are now, which is trying to fill this battle pass or complete this objective or something like that.
Right. And because there's like a tangible reward to it, it's going to supersede any other sort of intrinsic motivation for doing something.
Right. So it could even be this moment that, let's say you're playing a battle royale, I don't know, and you get some sort of a gun. It could be a really, really good gun, but it's not the right gun to complete this objective. And so you're like, okay, great. Like I might have gotten a good gun here, but well, I don't get this cosmetic or I don't get this currency or this other secondary thing outside of the game.
And so much of this is like artificially extending sort of a game's life cycle, right? So if a player has exhausted the uncertainty and outcome, you're going to then give them a carrot, right? Like, okay, so continue to play the game, right? Continue to do this thing that you have exhausted, and it's not particularly interesting anymore. You've learned how to do it effectively. Now I'm going to ask you to continue to do that thing that you've already done a million times, but instead this time I'm going to give you a t-shirt or something, right? Like, so for instance, if we come back to the foot race example, me and you are racing again, and I know that you're going to beat me, but there's somebody at the end of the line that says, hey, if you race with only one shoe on, I'll give you this t-shirt, win or lose. And I'm like, okay, well, like I know I'm going to lose, but I guess I'll go ahead and just like do this arbitrary thing that may or may not make the foot race any more or less interesting.
At a certain point when you're playing a game and you've exhausted a majority of games, you sort of reach this averaged out experience. And battle royales are really good at increasing the longevity of this because of the amount of variety and opportunities and outcomes that they have. You could get out immediately or you could get number one, right? There's so much of that range and there's so many crisscrossing player interactions.
Out of that sort of bundle of chaos, we get an emergent game experience, which is, oh, I managed to survive long enough to get into the top 10 or
right. But something that
one,
maybe is a little bit more small scale or 1v1 or whatever, like a fighting game or a trading card game or something, might exhaust some of that variance and variety a lot sooner.
Yeah, you're specifically testing your skill against one other player in that match. You might play best 2 out of 3, and then you know who's going to win, and then that's it.
Just to make sure that we kind of clear up like why games need to have some sort of like measurable results or measurable feedback. I'm going to borrow an example from Characteristics of Games, and there's a great example that was written in there that imagine the game Liar's Dice.
5 6s. Liar.
Liar's Dice is essentially you roll a bunch of dice secretly, and in turn, each player takes a turn basically betting how many of a particular dice is at the table. It's like that many or more or something like that.
Yeah, so you'd say something like 4 6s.
Right.
And it's like amongst everybody that's there, how many 6s are you betting that
and if someone is like, there's no way there's 4 6s, right, then it's kind of, I don't know what you say. Liar's Dice. I don't know.
Yeah.
Liar. Liar. And then everyone sort of reveals and you count up to see if they're wrong or right. So it's very simple, easy concept. It's a great game. But imagine playing Liar's Dice. Everyone rolls their dice. Before anyone takes their turn, you can point at any player and say, re-roll all of your dice. And it's like, okay, sure. But it doesn't really matter because you didn't know what their dice were.
Right.
It technically their dice when everything is unknown could have been any amount of dice, and so because of that, there isn't really any sort of measurable results of your decision, meaning that your decision was not meaningful because you did not see any sort of results from your actions.
So if there's no way for you to know the consequences of a decision that you've made, there's no way for you to know whether or not that decision was meaningful. What do we think players can learn from this? What do we think designers can learn from this? Let's start with players. What can players learn from this situation?
I think this might be a decent tool for players to try and pinpoint like what's not working for them anymore. Like, do you feel like you've played this type of, let's say you're on your 100th Apex Legends match, and are you thinking like, oh, I've done this before, like I've played through this before, then you might be reaching this certain point of averaging out your experience to where that uncertainty and outcome is not really working for you anymore. Things maybe need to be changing to create more variance for your experience in particular.
There's this other video about internalized patterns, which is talking about how players over time have internalized a lot of control schemes in games. And I think designers have leaned into, they've used that as sort of a quick path to helping players understand how to play their game. And because they've done that, we've got these solidified genres, and there's a whole lot of consequences that are good and bad for this type of this idea that you can utilize things that players already know to help onboard them into your game. The unfortunate part is that now you sort of have exhausted some amount of the learning and uncertainty and experience that players might have, because they already are like, oh, well, I know how a first-person shooter works. I understand that if I have expectations about how first-person shooters work, so on and so forth, and then first-person shooters all start to feel the same because these are sort of expectations. Besides like small innovations like, oh, I might be able to jump over a wall now where previously I couldn't do that.
And this can also even affect like the meaningful decision thing that we brought up as well, and that like I think there's plenty of times that I'll play like a new deck builder and I'm like, oh, well, this is like deck builder XYZ that I've played in the past. And so what ends up happening a lot of the times is that sometimes I'm able to fast forward those meaningful decisions, and I'm able to pinpoint from my experience playing these other games and be like, oh, well, this card is just not as good as this other card. Whereas normally you'd have to wait for sort of a meta to evolve, or you'd have to hope that there's some sort of like intrinsic motivation that a player just wants the challenge of picking this other suboptimal card. But instead you're able to fast forward and be like, no, this is just the better option.
I see the patterns emerging. I'm not necessarily surprised by much of what's going on here, and I can sort of shortcut myself to that certainty and outcome. And so I'm like, okay, well, yeah, I understand what the game is. I understand the decisions to be made, and I've done it before. So it's not as much of a game for me as it might be for somebody that hasn't had all those experiences. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please give us a like. If you like the videos that we have on the channel, please subscribe. And if you want to talk any more about the stuff that we're talking about, you can join our Discord. The link is in the description below.
Bye.
Thanks for watching.
Oh yeah, that's what we say.
We'll see you in the next one.